Welcome, everyone. This is the first technology transfer workshop of the ICM water quality model. That in and of itself means nothing other than it is a simulation of 30 years of work and effort by Carl, by Dom DeTora, by Jim Fitzpatrick, by many collaborators that have contributed to the work, and you're also, many of you are around the room. And so it is the hope that this, while it is a public domain and freely available and always has been, it's the hope that this is something of a jump start. So the web materials will be available in terms of the exercises and the lectures. The whole thing is going to be taped, so those in witness protection programs or on the lam from the law be forewarned. And I suppose we should start in the usual way by assigning blame for the workshop. If everything goes right, if all the exercises work, if Carl imparts some of his knowledge to you effectively, then it's Dom DeTora's fault. It's Dom DeTora's fault because he said in a peer review about almost 2 years ago, he said, you know, pretty good model, well found, very, very sound, and really needs to get out there in the larger community. And so this is the beginning of that, and I say the beginning of that because another workshop is planned for the summer, and this work will live on in the web-based materials for this course. If everything goes wrong in this course, if things fall apart, the exercises don't work, everyone leaves unhappy, then it's my fault because I was crazy enough to listen to Don. We will start now. I'm going to turn it over to Carl. We probably will have Carl lead us in introductions around the room. Be interested in any problems or difficulties you might have. Let our world-class instructors, Carl, Dom, Richard Tian here, and we have John Massey around somewhere, I think, and world-class TAs around the room. They'll introduce themselves in a moment. And
so let's just talk logistics before.
Thank you. Yeah. Right, and I think so. I'm going to turn it over to you, Gary, and you turn it over to Carl, and away we go.
We'll start here. So this is a section of an ICM computational grid for Chesapeake Bay. The point to ponder a couple of things about ICM grids. Number one, the grid is quadrilateral. There's a little segments there, little elements. You know, I guess I don't have a pointer, but they're quadrilateral elements. Actually, they're little cubes. The important thing about C equal ICM, it's what we call an unstructured grid, okay? So each one of these cubes is an independent little body. A structured grid would mean that we could point to any one of these and identify its location by some Cartesian coordinate, IJK, if you will, or longitude, latitude, depth, something like that. But in ICM, being unstructured, there's no IJK. Okay, so each one of these things is independent. And in a sense, it's interesting. If I was a cell, the only thing I know is who my neighbors are, okay? I don't know where I am, but I know who lives next door to me and who's on top of me and who lives upstairs and who lives downstairs. So, you know, that's really one of the key things to keep going about ICM. And it can make it very painful in a way, but in any event, these were decisions that were made a long time ago, and we have to live with them. Let me back up a minute. I maybe should have done this first. You know, I am the designer, if you will, of the water quality kinetics in ICM. And I did that about 30 years ago, and I didn't pull it out of nowhere. I worked from people who went before me, among them Jim Fitzpatrick and Dominic DeToro. So, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, but I'm the designer of the kinetics. Now, we had another fellow, his name was Tom Cole, who is long gone, but he actually wrote the Fortran. We had other individuals who did, for example, the transport algorithms, these sorts of things. So I'm the curator. I'm the only one who's still standing of the whole group who designed this thing. But a lot of things that make it up, I kind of say, why on earth did these people do it this way? And the answer is, I don't know, and they're no longer around to ask, okay? So I'm going to tell you how it is, but if you say to me why, you know, I may not be able to answer. Okay, that said, you should have downloaded a chapter in Word called Conservation of Mass. This chapter is up to date and you know, is good, and you can use it as a reference. In fact, that's effectively what we're going to lecture from. I'll mention also that, you know, the documentation for this model is not entirely up to date. You also will have downloaded in your packet, your original packet, a user's manual. That manual, I think, was published in 2004. That's the last time anybody was interested in funding a user's guide. That is the best documentation, but it is in many cases obsolete, okay? So on the one hand, refer to it. On the other hand, it isn't entirely up to date, but right now it's the best we have. So as we go through, I'll show you, we'll go over some of the documentation you had, and I'll let you know this is good or, you know, this needs some work. But the chapter on conservation of mass, I think you can rely on it. So basically speaking, I don't know if I can make that bigger or not. Let's try something here. This is really what makes ICM tick, this conservation of mass equation right here. And what that says is it's really simple. For each one of these little cubes, each one of these little boxes, this is the mass in that cube, the volume times concentration. It says the change in mass is what flows in. This is dispersion or mixing. And then any local sources or sinks. Those sources or sinks can be internal. For example, if your phytoplankton takes up nutrient or something like that, that's an internal source or sink. If there's a treatment plant or a watershed or something like that, that's an external source or sink. This summation is the flow across all faces. If these are cubes, there are 6 faces. Same with the dispersion. Strictly speaking with ICM, these things can be any shape. They do not have to be cubes. And in fact, we have on occasion worked with other shapes. So they could be octagons. You know, there could be 8 faces. There could be only 4 faces or something like that. But mostly they're cubes. And if you're talking about Chesapeake Bay, we're talking about cubes. So, so there you are. Now, what you have to do is you have to take this thing and transfer it into computerese. So what we do is we break this thing down. We don't solve it all at once. We break it down. So the first thing we do is we take the longitudinal and lateral flow. And this is more or less, well, there's what the equation looks like. So we compute a sort of an intermediate concentration in that cell based solely on the longitudinal and lateral advection. And we're going to switch over to here for a little bit. Okay. Okay. Maybe we won't. What we have to do is, this is again the change in concentration. The thing I want to point out is what we have to do is to get the flow and the concentration across each one of these faces. Okay, so you've got a cube, and what you need to do is get the concentration coming across each one of the 6 faces. Now, The concentration itself is the concentration, think of it if you will, at the center of the cube. So you have concentration at the center of all these cubes, but what you want is the concentration at the face. So you have to have some way of determining what that concentration at the face is. And there are two ways of doing that. We're going to talk about them in a couple of minutes, but the first way is what you call upwind differencing or backwards differencing. It just says the flow across any face is equal to the concentration in the box upstream. So there's no interpolation, there's no nothing. You just say, I'm at a face, whichever box is upstream, we're going to use that concentration. Really simple. Another way, and the more popular way of doing it, is what's called quickest. What quickest does, and I'll show you some graphs and things in a few moments, but quickest takes three concentrations. It takes the two upstream cells and the actual cell. It fits a parabola to those. So it says that the concentration at this face, what it's going to do is it's going to fit a second order polynomial to it. It fits a parabola to it, and that's how it gets the concentration. And you could imagine that's a great deal more accurate than simply taking the concentration in the box upstream. Okay, so let's move over to this one for a little while. Okay. You have been supplied with what we call a 30-box model. You downloaded something from the internet. You should have downloaded a 30-box model. And there was actually a folder, a directory. It had in it the model code. It had in it a set of model inputs. It even had an executable that would run on a Windows machine. So let's look at the 30-box model for a few moments. The 30-box model is actually a two-dimensional model. This is an elevation, if you will, so the 30-box model is 3 cells deep and 10 cells long. Order of magnitude, it's scaled like the main stem of Chesapeake Bay, okay? So I think it's about 30 meters deep, well, no, 30 feet, 10 meters deep. It's about 200 kilometers long. Just like I said, order of magnitude, it's scaled like the main stem of Chesapeake Bay. It's got fall line flows, and it's got an ocean boundary. And those flows are, roughly speaking, the tidal average flows in Chesapeake Bay. So the loads to it are, again, roughly speaking, the loads to Chesapeake Bay. And as you can see, there are, I'll do it here. There are 30 boxes, and they're numbered sequentially, all right? So they're box 1 through 30. So once again, there's no IJK or anything like that. These are unstructured. It's an unstructured grid. And they overlay it's rather interesting, well, aside, the screen is delayed, so when I move this thing in front of me, it takes like about 5 seconds for the screen to follow up. Anyhow, there is a sediment sublayer underneath that, and those cells are sediment diagenesis model cells, and this afternoon we're going to hear from Dominic DeToro about the diagenesis model. But that's what your 30-box model will look like.